Welcome to Unit 4 of Introductory Horticulture. Today we're going to talk about environmental requirements for good plant growth. In this section, we're going to talk about the different water needs, the nutritional needs, temperature and light. Plants, when they grow, all of these different factors can either stunt or encourage growth. If a plant doesn't have the correct amount of water, it's going to stunt and it's not going to grow properly. And then if any one of the basic nutrients is not present, it will also have a problem and won't grow properly. Something we really have to consider is making sure that we're looking for all of the things that we have out there to ensure that our plants are healthy and that we aren't forgetting anything when we look at our plants. So this is going to be a good lecture to kind of see about all those different things that maybe we don't think about in the beginning to uh, consider when growing plants. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the water, and this is very important because about 70 to 90% of the fresh weight of a plant is the water, and very similar to us as humans, water makes up most of our mass, most of our bodies, and it's very important for uh, kind of holding everything together and keeping us as a medium. Um, Water is going to be how all of the uh, processes within the plant occur. It would not be possible in the absence of water. Also, all nutrients are moved through the plant by water and through the the fluid movement process. Also, as I talked in the last lecture, water helps cool a plant by allowing it to transpire, just as we sweat when we are hot and we want to cool ourselves off. Also, a plant will sweat to cool itself off, and this is going to be in the form of water. Nutrition. So there are 16 elements that are required for a plant to grow. They range from macronutrients, primary macronutrients, secondary macronutrients, and then micronutrients. Most soils do contain the required nutrition. The primary macronutrients are the nutrients that need to be supplemented using fertilizer. Some of the secondary nutrients also need to be supplemented depending on location and parent material of the soil. Uh, Next, we're going to talk about temperature. High temperatures can decrease the growing speed of a plant. I live in a desert, and we can get upwards of 100 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and a plant will actually stop growing at these temperatures and will not produce. So it kind of goes into a dormancy, but it actually just stops growing and it conserves most of its energy and tries to keep itself very cool. So it will use extra water and it will transpire more. Low temperatures. This is something that we deal with here also in the winter. So we do have a process where certain uh, plants can actually die when it gets too cold. Where I live currently, there are no citrus trees that can grow outside because during a hard frost of between 15 and 25 degrees, these citrus trees will actually freeze up and won't be able to grow. So that's something to consider when you are looking at different plants in different environments to understand that we have to take into account the low temperatures. Typically, when we pick a plant for a site, we don't really look at how hot it gets there. We look at how cold it gets, and we adapt plants to how cold tolerant they are, and we allow that to be the determining factor for what we want to grow in a specific area. So if you your lowest temperatures are between 0 and 10 degrees in the wintertime, that's what we need to consider when we're growing plants. If your if your summer temperatures are over 100 degrees, it is a factor, but not as much of a factor as the temperature in the coldest parts of your year. Something that you can also experience, especially in the golf course industry, is low temperatures during, say, a frost. We had this occur often. Any kind of movement or traffic on grass will um, kill off the top layer of grass until it warms back up, and you can actually end up with black tracks or black footprints throughout the golf course if you allow people out too soon, because you actually are killing the top part of the plant, sort of like a frostbite issue where it can't recover until it gets warm enough for that part of the plant to grow back out. So other things that are important when we start to consider environment are the day and amount of light during the day. So during the days, there are short days and long days. Obviously, during the summer, we have longer days, and then during the winter time, we have shorter days. And this is due to the way the sun phases through our environment. And this actually can do a lot of different things to plants. And when a plant is receiving more light, it will produce more sugars, more food, and it will grow better. And when this the day length gets shorter, we start to have a little bit of less growth. And these are the days that we don't see as much movement. And obviously, this is during the winter time, so it's not always a detriment because a lot of times we are already in a dormant state where the plants aren't growing, so it's not as concerning. Other things that can be affected by the day and light length is fruiting. There are certain plants that will seed and fruit based on the day, the amount of light. So they there are certain plants that have vegetative stages where they will grow, and then when the sun starts to the days start to become shorter, they will then start to fruit and become viable for seed production. So underground, we're going to talk about a little bit of agriculture, and basically what this is talking about is some of the detriments to California's agriculture. And we use chemicals, we use pesticides, and through the constant movement of soil, we've actually lost a lot of the native soil fungus that helps us to have a symbiotic relationship with plants. Um, you may not know this yet, but you will learn about it in soil science. There is a symbiotic relationship between the soil and the roots of a plant, and this is called your, oh my goodness, mycorrhizae fungi. This is going to create a relationship with the plants. It's going to allow those plants to grow better, and the fungus gets nutrients from the plant, and the plant gets water and nutrients from the fungus. So they have a shared relationship. So in the soil, we are going to do a real basic understanding. We have various layers of soil. You have topsoil, you have subsoil, and you have lower subsoil, and then going into bedrock. These topsoils are called your O layer, your A layer. Then you have sometimes an E layer, and then you have a B, C, and then you have your bedrock. These different layers, typically you're using the up down to the B layer for growing. So that would be your subsoil layer number 2. Subsoil number 3 would be your C layer. Not a lot of plants grow down in that area. And all of your nutrients are found within your O, A, and E layer. So that's where you're going to find all of your nutrients and all of your organic materials. That's where the plant's going to want to grow. That's going to be the top anywhere between 6 and 18 inches of soil. So there are a few different types of water that are in the soil. There's something called gravitational water. and there's called capillary water. Gravitational water is the water that is moving through the soil, that is being there's so much extra water in the soil, it will flow down through, and it will move past the root zone. Then capillary water is the water that is being held um, and is actually stronger than the gravitational forces, and it will hold itself inside the soil, inside the pore space, allowing plants to have access to this water. When we start to look at different types of soil, sandy soils or more coarse soils, they drain well, but they don't hold moisture, and they also don't hold food for a plant. So they're not really ideal for growing in. They are ideal for drainage. We use them in golf greens, and we have to really work a golf green and protect and provide a lot of food and a lot of water for these systems and these environments. On the contrary, clay soil, which would be the finest particle, is also not good to grow in because it doesn't allow water to pass through. It holds on to it, and it holds it on so strongly that sometimes there may be a lot of water in the soil, but a plant just doesn't have the strength to pull it away from the soil. The ideal soils that we want to look at are these loamy soils. So ideal would be sandy loam, clay loam, or silty loam. And if you can be blessed with being able to grow in one of these, typically we don't have a lot of problems with nutrient holding or water holding, and they are very ideal. And these are the types of soils that we try to strive for when we are amending soils or making soils better. So, as I just said, amending a soil is going to be improving that soil. So we can do certain things like add organic material, we can till the soil, we can utilize cover crops that are going to be, say, leguminous, and they're going to impart nitrogen back into the soil. We want to make sure that if we're going to add things in, they are doing good things for us. So a lot of organic material will be great at retaining moisture, such as animal manures, peat moss, sawdust. These will all impart nutrients in the soil and have something for water to hold on to. Now, something I can make sure to let you know, if you're going to use animal manures, make sure they're composted animal manures first, because um, as we've talked about before, seeds are moved around through when a plant animal will eat the seeds, and it will defecate it somewhere else. And these seeds can actually survive the digestion process through cows, horses, pigs, chickens. They can these seeds can stay viable through this process, and they will actually grow an undesired area if you don't want them to grow there. So the way we take these seeds out of viability is we fully compost this manure, bring it up to 165 degrees, will kill the viability of most seeds. So this is how we can utilize that animal manure without having to worry about potential undesirable plants growing. Something that you really need to understand is nutrient deficiencies. And we're going to go real brief here, but I'm going to post another lecture that is much more in depth, talking about nutrient deficiencies. Um, some of the really common ones are yellow or pale leaves, and we're talking about nitrogen deficiency. Or if we start to see our plants take on a purple color, then this is going to signify a phosphorus deficiency. So these are just a couple of common ones. Other things we have to consider are soil pests. There are nematodes in the soil. Now, it says soil pests. There are some beneficial nematodes and there are some non-beneficial nematodes. What these non-beneficial nematodes will do is they feed on the root system of a plant, and they make it so that a plant cannot uptake any nutrients or water. The way to get rid of them is, again, to compost soil and allow the soil to heat up to this 165 degrees, thus rendering the nematodes dead and not able to survive that hot temperature. There's also nematodes are actually kind of an interesting breed. There are chemicals that do um, take care of the problem, but before you consider using chemicals on a nematode, you want to consider biologicals. There are several bacterias that can attack the non-beneficial nematodes and actually take them out of your soil. So this is like introducing a bacteria into your soil, and the bacteria will attack the nematodes and will take them out of the soil by rendering them sterile and not allowing those nematodes to reproduce. So when we start talking about plant media mixes, this is going to be sometimes soilless mediums, and these are going to be utilized in container crops or when we are transplanting plants. They These are typically uniform because they're mixed, and they're usually used a machine to do the mixing. These are often pre-sterilized. There are soil steamers that heat up the soil to the 165 degrees, rendering the seeds and any other things in there non-viable. And they're going to weigh less. They're going to hold more moisture. They're basically an engineered soil that helps to grow and perpetuate plants better. So then the disadvantage of these are they typically can be lacking certain nutrients, and then you have to supplement those back in. And when you are transplanting these plants out into the environment, sometimes plants have a tendency not to want to leave this really easy growing medium because it's really soft and they can push roots through really easy. And then when it encounters the hard soil, it doesn't want to grow through the harder soil because it's been living this cushy life in this soilless medium, and you put it out into a hard soil environment, and it doesn't like to have to work for growing through the soil. So some of the things that you can talk about, and a lot of these are mixed together. So you would never use um, one of these at a time. And I've used all of these in the past. And typically I even use these when I'm transplanting or trying to amend a soil. So perlite, this is of organic origin, and this is something that's utilized to hold on to moisture. It's going to hold on to more moisture than regular soil, swell up a little bit, and then be able to release that moisture back in. Peat moss, this is also used for moisture retention. It's going to create some nitrogen. It's going to give good carbon into the soil. It's going to allow plants to feed off of this peat moss. Limestone, that is something for calcium carbonate. This is to keep the pH regulated. Tree bark, this is going to be to hold on to moisture and allow if when you water a soil, it allows that water to be held in the soil and doesn't allow the sun to evaporate water out of the soil. It holds a layer over the top of the soil to allow that water not to be um, evaporated away. Compost, as I've talked about, this is a very variety of things. It can be any kind of organic material that you're decomposing. So it could be leaves. It could be grass clippings. There's many things that can be coming into compost. Animal manures. And then one thing about the animal manures, while I'm here, you want to make sure that you're only using the animal manure of herbivore plants. You do not want to use carnivorous plants when you are composting. The plants, carnivorous animals' feces will attract other animals, and it will attract things that you don't want within your compost bin. And then biochar. This is charred biomass, which is basically burnt in a vacuum, and it doesn't consume the plant material, it converts the plant material. So this is a very specialized process of creating this biomass, charred biomass. So when we're talking about fertilizers, there are artificial fertilizers, and typically these are used to introduce nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, also known, and you'll hear me talk about it as NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and the K stands for the potassium, and these initials come from the periodic table of elements. So anytime you see, and as you see on these two bags, there's a 10, 10, 10, or on the other bag it's 10, 6, 4. That would be 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and then 10% potassium. And then on the other bag, you're talking about 10% nitrogen, 6% phosphorus, and 4% potassium. So that's how you know how much is in each bag. Also, when we're looking at these fertilizers, if you see a fourth number, typically that's going to be your calcium or a sulfur component. It will have to mention in the bag what type of component you're looking at. But the first three are always the same, and then if you add in a fourth one, there are a variety of things that can be added to this fertilizer. So organic fertilizers, these are fertilizers that are derived from some sort of a natural material, some sort of a an organic base. Basically, it's often something that's decomposed. It's a manure. It's going to be something that is heavily has a lot of microorganisms within it. Typically, organic fertilizers are not fast-acting fertilizers. They're also not very high numbers. So you're talking in the percentages, usually 5% or less across the board for all three. And these are meant to be a slower released, slower acting, and typically a organic fertilizer will build soil nutrition. It will be not something that you can see results from right away, but it will continue to feed the soil and feed the microorganisms within the soil and allow them to grow stronger and strengthen your soil. Something very important to consider is your soil acidity. Um, Basically, when we're looking at soil acidity, obviously 7 being neutral is where we would like to keep it. Most plants grow in a slightly acidic environment, and you can utilize materials that will either lower the pH or raise the pH. Here in California, we don't have a problem with acidic soils. We have very alkaline or basic soils. We have typically between 7 and 8.5, and I've seen up to 9 pH soils. These are not super desirable to grow plants in. Some of the nutrients within the soil, some of those 16 plant nutrients actually become unavailable when you are above a 7 in the pH system. So you have to use certain things that will lower the pH, and these are often sulfurs, sulfates. They actually create a sulfuric acid, a weak sulfuric acid within the soil when they come into contact with water, and that will help lower the pH. Unfortunately, a lot of these changes are temporary and need to be continual applications. Now, on the other hand, if you do have an acidic soil, you can raise that acidity to become more basic by adding lime or other calcium products, and you can uh, use something called cation exchange to help raise your pH, even if it's only temporary. And gypsum, it does say it does not change soil pH, but what it does is it creates a temporary cation exchange to allow plants to uptake certain nutrients if they're unavailable at the pH that you're currently under. Okay, so temperature. As I said earlier, there are temperatures above which all plant growth stops. There are plants that will, when it's below freezing, will stop plants, and then freezing temperatures can also kill certain crops, whether they're young or if they are, say, tropical plants or subtropical plants, the freezing temperatures can kill those as well. Okay, light, we talked about this a little bit, but light must be present. It's the energy source that creates the sugars for a plant. If we have too much light, though, it can destroy leaf proteins and actually will create almost like a sunburn or a sun scald within the plants. And like I said before, I have a whole lecture that I do on abiotic disorders, and we talk a lot about light destruction and how that can create problems within a plant. And then, as I talked about before, we have different types of flowers, and when they want to come flower, short days or long days, there are different types of plants that want to flower at different types of the year. Different times of the year, excuse me. And then humidity. So most plants like a lot of humidity between 40 and 80. Unfortunately, here in California, we typically have between 10 and 40. So we don't have ideal humidity, but one thing we do have that high humidity can bring is high humidity brings the potential for disease, and we don't have as high of disease pressure here as other areas of the country. Where I'm originally from, in New York, has a very high disease pressure because when it gets warm out during the day and the humidity is very high, it actually holds moisture and it becomes a breeding ground for fungus and other bacterias and allows these to perpetuate and really infect a soil or a plant. Okay, talking about the adaptability of plants. Plants are very adaptable. As I said before, we don't typically worry about how hot it gets. We more worry about how cold it gets. So when we start to pick the correct plant, we want to look at what the cold hardiness of a plant is. That will be the amount of cold that it can tolerate before it freezes or its cell walls start to rupture. When we are looking at plants, typically they are within 10-degree increments. So we would talk about 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and then 30 and above. There also is plants that do have a cold hardiness that is below 0, and so you would start the opposite. It would go 0 to -10, -10 to -20, and I'm not sure, I think it really goes -20 to -30, and that might be the lowest. So the thing about plants is they're pretty adaptable. Even if you get one that will be uh, occasionally experiencing lower temperatures than it's used to, sometimes it will manage to survive and sometimes it won't. And then there's also plants that won't survive even above its cold hardiness. It's just plants can be finicky and they do adapt, but we have to make sure we take into account the cold hardiness of a plant. When we start talking about plant diseases and insects, this is gets into a whole other topic, and there's a whole another class here that strictly talks about pesticides and applications and understanding diseases and insects. There are different ways to handle this. There is something called the IPM approach or the integrated pest management approach, and this is going to be utilizing monitoring and cultural practices to help maintain and minimize the effects of plant diseases and insects. Also, we have pesticide applications where we are going to use certain chemicals that will help to minimize these plant diseases or their damage and minimize insects. There are also biologicals that we can use, so bacterias. We can introduce uh, beneficial insects that will be predators to non-beneficial insects. And something else we can utilize is crop rotation, and crop rotation is basically not necessarily something we do in horticulture, but in agriculture. If we plant so many years of one crop, we would like to introduce a different crop into that environment so that the soil can be re-strengthened and different nutrients will be taken out of the soil, so you won't rob all of the same nutrients over and over and over again. So talking about gases and particles, all plants need carbon dioxide to grow, and when we look at nursery environments or greenhouse environments, they actually add carbon dioxide into certain nursery environments, greenhouse environments to encourage the rate of growth. If you remember, carbon dioxide is vital in the photosynthesis process, and it's actually proportional. So the more carbon dioxide, the more sugars it can produce within the plant. There's also gases that can be toxic to plants. So sulfur dioxide or carbon dioxide can decrease growth. And again, when I speak about abiotic disorders, I'm going to show you some pictures of these reduced plant growth scenarios. So in summary, this is a huge topic. There's a lot of information here. This is something really important to focus on. We really have to take into account the plant environment, both above the ground and below the ground. We have to understand soil conditions and how those can affect a plant growth. Plants are the plants, but they can't grow without water. They can't grow without soil. There's many, many things that are needed for that plant to grow and to be a viable organism. So make sure you understand all of the different different things within the environment that can affect a plant's growth. But also remember that certain plants do adapt to where they grow and where they live, and they may not be happy all the time, but they can still grow and be plants, even if they're missing some of these things. So please, this is a really important lecture. I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of this stuff in future lessons and future tests. So pay attention to this one and come back to it often. Until next time.